people want to say, oh, well, China does this or China does that. It doesn't mean that there can be no criticism of China, but it does mean that in the scope of things, in the largest sense, China is not invading countries. They're not blowing people up. They're trying to create a system in a society that allows for multiple nations to have sovereignty and to have something outside of U.S. hegemony. And that should all be heralded and rewarded.
I think we have this simple problem that we are losing the narrative, like politics and war, just as Clausewitz said, are very closely related. And at this point, I am unfortunately in this cynical position where I do think that the only real war crime is losing a war, because it's the only thing that gets you hung from the neck. Everything else, you can bomb Iraq, you can bomb whoever you want and kill millions, as long as you don't lose the war. And by losing, I don't mean the way the US lost Vietnam, because it just didn't win. But not winning is not the same as actually losing. Saddam lost the war, right? And in the same sense,
Saddam, Gaddafi, and I think Zelensky is fearing that if he goes to the peace table or gives up somehow, then he becomes the next Gaddafi.
Oh, he will become the next Diem. You know how Diem, the South Vietnamese leader, was shot by his own people with a nod, with an okay from the White House, as we know now from Kennedy 2 months before Kennedy was shot by his own people, probably. But the point I wanted to make is, like, also politics works that way. As long as you win the election and you get into office and you can impose your narrative, you win history, right? So it's the powers that be. So there's just not enough people who have the other narrative, I suppose.
Well, we're doing our best. I got to tell you, I work very hard. So
I know.
We're doing I'm just kidding around, but we're doing our best to get that narrative out there. And I think that's why you see so much censorship. That's why there was, I haven't heard many people point out this theory or this idea. There was a brief golden window of an actual information revolution, and I'll just speak for America, but there was a lot of global, feeling to it or ideas to it. But there was a golden window from about like 2008, maybe 2007, somewhere in there, when internet was not suppressed, was essentially open. There weren't really algorithms stopping people. And the internet, even though it started well before that, wasn't available and easily accessible to every person. So around 2006 and 2007, it starts to become easily accessible to everybody in America. That window lasts through 2016. It creates Occupy. In some regards, it may have been responsible for Obama. Now, granted, it was all lies, but still, it might have been responsible for getting him into office. It was responsible for Bernie Sanders. WikiLeaks started around that time. The Arab Spring, even though much of that ended horribly, was largely connected to this. And around 2016, or maybe really exactly at 2016, when they saw how close Bernie Sanders got to winning that nomination, probably would have won the presidency, and everything, they had to rig every different level against him to stop him. And that was the moment that the hammer came down on, we need to stop this information from moving so freely. And they started on multiple levels. I mean, the Twitter files have shown us just how connected to the state and the intelligence agencies Twitter is. But 2016, exactly after the election, I went from having a very large Facebook fan page that was gaining 5,000 followers a week to never gaining followers again. I have been stuck at 332,000 people since that time, and my posts are shown to a tiny, tiny percentage of that. So it was really that moment that they were like, we got to shut all this down and we got to stop whatever this is from happening. And I don't hear many people talk about how we had that golden window and now the ruling elite are doing everything they can to try and shut it down. They've also gutted net neutrality. They obviously, it's a combination of immense propaganda on things like Russiagate, combined with shadow banning, combined with censorship, combined with, deleting RT America from the digital archives, like a modern book burning, just every level.
They did that? RT America, even the old, the recordings were destroyed?
On YouTube. Everything that I ever put out on YouTube is gone.
Yeah, that's just a crime, basically. So we see, though, a pushback, at least a little bit, in the US, right? The Twitter files, like the fact that Matt Taibbi and others could work on these and could put it out, and the legacy media had to defend it as a nothing burger, then at the same time also attack these people.
But can I throw in here that Matt Taibbi has been aggressively targeted? The day he unveiled the Twitter files, the IRS opened a case on him. The day he testified in front of Congress, the IRS raided his house. And after he testified in front of Congress, Democrats, a few, have claimed that he lied to Congress. He didn't, but they claimed he lied to Congress, and therefore he should be arrested. So Matt Taibbi is a good example of how aggressively our state will go after you if you reveal the truth that is inconvenient to them.
True. And we have another truth teller who's been in prison now for 7-8 years, right, in Belmarsh, and he's probably going to go to the US and might be in prison for 175 years. So the everything that's happening to Assange, thank you, is extremely outrageous, even considering that he's an Australian citizen who published things in the UK, and the US is saying, no, we have jurisdiction over that. If that goes through, it means that any journalist anywhere in the world who publishes anything is liable to the United States and will be persecuted under US law, right? Anywhere, anything.
You're absolutely right. And it's amazing that more journalists have not stood up for Julian Assange. I mean, there are many organizations and many human rights organizations that have stood up for him eventually, but it's amazing that, like, all of the mainstream media journalists, none of them will come out in support of Julian Assange. Even the international ones, BBC, all of these around the world, none of them are fighting for Julian Assange, despite the fact that his case is showing, exactly as you just said, that the United States can grab anyone, anywhere, and have them tortured in prison for years and years, if not, I mean, we'll see what happens, if not their entire lives, for printing true, absolutely true, never incorrect facts about the United States, whether that person was, even if that person was not a United States citizen, even if that person never operated from the United States, has no connection to the United States, doesn't matter. The US is basically saying our laws, and whatever laws we feel like bending, apply to everywhere in the world. And it is truly horrifying. It should be horrifying to foreign journalists as well, but and of course it speaks to what kind of spineless pieces of garbage are your average corporate journalists.
For a long time, this kind of the long arm of US self-justice used to be only applied to the Middle East, basically, where anyone who disagrees will be blown up and blown into pieces. But now the US is expanding this concept to the entire globe, saying like we will not only use deadly force, we will use deadly lawfare in order to get you, which makes it very different from even the Soviet Union, where, you know, you could leave, if you managed to escape the Soviet Union, you were more or less safe. You might still be poisoned, but you were more or less, I mean, at least not legally. But now I think this is really, if the US goes through with this, if this comes through, if this is the new rule of the game, then nobody's going to be safe anywhere.
Yeah, I think that's true. And what they've done to Assange is truly horrific. I mean, we now have the evidence that under Trump, they were considering assassinating or kidnapping him. And yet the UK is preparing to ship him to a country that planned to kill him. So I can't imagine a less conducive place for justice than the country that had plans to murder someone. and you know, it is horrific. The U.S. has other examples of political prisoners as well. Mumia Abu-Jamal, Stephen Donziger was locked up in his own house for 3 years for winning a lawsuit against Chevron for their egregious toxic dumping, intentional toxic dumping. So the U.S. does have political prisoners, and you know, we like to act like as if we're this bastion of freedom and this bastion of justice, and it's anything but.
I mean, it's kind of it's tragic, but it's even kind of cute how it all unravels in front of our eyes. How also like membership of Sweden in NATO became tied to basically Sweden giving in into all of these anti-human rights demands coming from Turkey, and Sweden was like very harshly trying to say like, we're trying as hard as we can to give you all of these people who you are persecuting, but our courts are blocking us. It's isn't it fantastic how we are absolutely willing to throw all and every value overboard if it just serves the greater purpose of more war.
Yeah, and if it serves the greatest purpose of empire, really. I mean, Sweden is just bowing down to the U.S. empire, doing whatever the U.S. says. But the U.S. power is waning, you know, to switch over to a slightly optimistic tone. The U.S. power is waning. You see so many countries standing up against what the U.S. is telling them to do or telling them how to behave. 80% of the world's population is in countries that have not signed on to U.S. sanctions in this proxy war. You have the BRICS nations. I think it's 41 countries now would like to be admitted to BRICS, which is just a huge tectonic shift in the economics of this world. And let's not forget that we need that tectonic shift, or else we will do nothing about climate crisis, because the petrodollar, it's right there in the name, is tied to petroleum. And as long as the U.S. petrodollar rules all, then the U.S. will never allow any other world system to be unveiled that doesn't abide by fossil fuel use. So unless we cut the petrodollar off, we will never deal with the climate crisis.
A big part of this, of course, has to do with the lack of alternatives, right? I mean, we are suffering from a lack of good alternatives, let's say, to YouTube, because it's the biggest and just generally the best platform. It's amazing what this thing can do, and we have others that can do similar things, but on a much smaller and much more confined scale. And in the world system, we have you know, for a long time, Swift just was the only game in town in order to do transactions across borders on a commercial scale. And now we're seeing that other countries are starting to build that. I mean, BRICS is a counter concept to the G7 and so on, where economically powerful countries can get together. Where do you see this going, and where do you see like Russian and Chinese leadership in this building of alternative structures?
Yeah, I mean, it is China's leadership that is taking us there. And, you know, people want to say, oh, well, China does this or China does that. It doesn't mean that there can be no criticisms of China, but it does mean that in the scope of things, in the largest sense, China is not invading countries. They're not blowing people up. They're trying to create a system and a society that allows for multiple nations to have sovereignty and to have something outside of U.S. hegemony. And that should all be heralded and rewarded. You know, yes, China is one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gases, but also per capita, they're nowhere near the United States in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And so, yeah, China and Russia's leadership has become pivotal in undermining the hegemony of the United States. Now, if the United States had proved to be this benevolent, magical empire that gave everyone equality and created a sustainable world, then maybe I'd be like, well, undermining that hegemony doesn't sound so good. But the United States has proven a time and time again that we are a war state. We care zero for environment, for a sustainable world, and the United States will run roughshod over anyone who gets in their way. They don't care who has to be killed. But like you said, they do it now more with lawfare than they do it with bullets. But still, it's cooing endless number of countries. You know, just a few months ago, we had 2 successful lawfare coups in 1 week in Argentina against the vice president, and Peru getting Castillo out, and that's what the U.S. does now. So the U.S. has proven that we are not a good shepherd for this world. Not that there should ever be empires, but we're not a good shepherd. We are destroying this planet.
The funny thing is, of course, that the US is highly allergic to even the slightest amount of what it perceives, what could be something that it does to other countries, right? If there's even the slightest chance of somebody interfering in US elections, they cry foul. And the interference of US in other countries is official official dogma, even, and is even repeated
our
like
number
that.
one export. Our number one export is hypocrisy.